On the morning of August 6, 1945, deep beneath Tokyo's Imperial General Headquarters, the air hangs heavy with the strain of a collapsing empire. In the sterile hum of the underground bunkers, staff officers in sweat-stained khaki plot the shrinking perimeter on massive wall maps. Through the subterranean nerve center strides Japan's War Minister, General Korechika Anami. At 58, his bearing is that of a man forged in victory, his weathered face a testament to an unshakable belief in Japan's divine destiny. The morning briefing is a familiar ritual. Updates on the massive Ketsugo defense preparations, the strategy designed to make any American invasion so costly it would force a negotiated peace. But on this morning, an unnerving silence emanates from one section of the map. The communications board for the Chugoku Military District is blank. There are no reports from Hiroshima's 2nd General Army Headquarters, no word from the 400,000 military personnel and civilians in Japan's 8th largest city. Technicians desperately scan the frequencies, their dials returning only a hiss of static where field reports should be crackling. A young communications officer, his composure failing, finally reports the impossible. "Sir, we've lost all contact with Hiroshima. All military frequencies, all civilian radio. Everything went silent at approximately 8:15 this morning." In the final desperate summer of 1945, an unsettling silence fell over a major Japanese city. For a high command accustomed to the grim calculus of total war, the sudden cessation of all communication was an anomaly of the highest order. Cities with major military headquarters and a population of 340,000 people do not simply vanish from a grid, especially after reporting normal defensive preparations only hours before. The burden of deciphering this mystery and of steering the nation's fate fell to 6 men, the Supreme War Council. They were General Korechika Anami, Admiral Soma Toyota, General Yashijiro Yumizu, Prime Minister Admiral Kantaro Suzuki, Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo, and Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yanai. Despite the nightly firebombing of their cities by American B-29s, this council clung to a conviction that victory was still attainable. Their seemingly paradoxical confidence was rooted in a closely guarded secret: Japan's own quest for the atomic bomb. Since 1940, 2 parallel programs have been underway: the Army's IGO project, led by Dr. Yoshio Nishina, and the Navy's FGO program under Dr. Bunsaka Arakatsu. These were not speculative ventures. Nishina was a physicist of international renown who had worked alongside Niels Bohr, possessing a profound grasp of atomic fission. Yet, it was his very expertise that led him to a critical conclusion. Building such a weapon was a Herculean task of almost impossible scale. The industrial infrastructure required for uranium enrichment alone, involving vast electromagnetic separation facilities, was simply beyond the capacity of a nation already stretched to its breaking point. The undertaking was simply too vast. Colossal processing plants, thousands of tons of uranium ore, and an electrical consumption that could drain entire regions. Based on these realities, Japan's own leading physicists had calculated that even the United States, with its vast, unmolested industrial might, could produce perhaps 1, maybe 2 atomic weapons at most. Therefore, as the first reports from Hiroshima began to filter on the morning of August 6th, scattered, contradictory, and scarcely believable, Japan's military leaders dismissed them with the certainty of men who possessed superior knowledge. A preliminary dispatch noted a small number of B-29s and a new type of bomb, resulting in considerable damage. At Naval Headquarters, Admiral Soma Toyota, Chief of the General Staff, barely glanced up from his maps. He had witnessed the firebombing raids that had already incinerated 42 Japanese cities. This, he surmised, was simply a more concentrated incendiary attack. But as the hours passed, an impenetrable silence descended. Train schedules to Hiroshima were suspended indefinitely. All military communications remained severed. Then came the most unsettling report of all, from a weather reconnaissance pilot who described a phenomenon without precedent: a monstrous, mushroom-shaped cloud boiling nearly 40,000 feet into the stratosphere. The final, terrifying clarification arrived via shortwave, as Japanese monitors intercepted a broadcast from President Truman. 16 hours ago, the American president declared, "An American airplane dropped 1 bomb on Hiroshima. That bomb had more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. In the hushed chambers of Japan's Supreme War Council, the initial reports from Hiroshima were met not with panic, but with a disciplined, almost defiant skepticism. War Minister Korechika Anami was the first to give voice to the consensus. With the studied calm of a career military officer, he framed the attack as sophisticated psychological warfare. Even if the Americans had managed to develop a single atomic device, he argued, the immense technical requirements, a conclusion validated by Japan's own atomic research, rendered mass production an impossibility. This assessment was grimly affirmed by others, including Munitions Minister Taijiro Toyoda. The logic seemed sound. If the Americans possessed an arsenal of such weapons, they would have been deployed months ago to force a conclusion to the war. This had to be a desperate, singular gambit. Herein lay a fatal irony. Their scientific expertise had become their greatest weakness. Their knowledge of how difficult the task was had blinded them to an industrial capability they simply could not fathom. Unbeknownst to the Council, the Manhattan Project had employed 130,000 workers, consumed more electricity than entire nations, and represented the largest clandestine industrial undertaking in human history. As August 6th turned to August 7th, while the first horrific details began to arrive from Hiroshima's ruins, Japan's leaders were making decisions based on what they knew to be possible, facing an enemy that had redefined the very meaning of the word. For Japan's leading nuclear physicist, Dr. Yoshio Nishina, the atomic bomb was a known quantity, a set of theoretical calculations on a page. But on August 7, 1945, he would be forced to confront the terrifying abyss separating academic abstraction from physical reality. His 11-hour train journey from Tokyo became a passage into a progressively alien world. Miles from Hiroshima's core, the landscape began to show signs of profound violation. Trees were violently stripped bare, utility poles fractured, and the air grew heavy with a strange, acrid odor that stung the senses. The journey halted abruptly where the railroad itself ceased to exist, the steel tracks contorted by unimaginable forces into grotesque spirals. Nishina was compelled to walk the final 5 miles into what had once been a city. This was not destruction. It was a form of erasure. Buildings had not simply collapsed. They had been vaporized, leaving behind the now infamous human shadows burned into concrete. The final, silent testament of individuals caught in the blast at 8:15 a.m. The hypocenter, the point on the ground directly beneath the bomb's detonation 1,000 feet above, was the epicenter of a sterile, circular wasteland extending for miles. Yet, the most profound shock for scientists was the living. Nishina came face to face with its biological consequence, radiation sickness. A phenomenon once confined to the pages of theoretical physics papers was now a walking human horror. Its victims a terrifying new category of casualty in a world irrevocably changed. In the irradiated ruins of Hiroshima, the survivors resembled spectral figures from a nightmare. Irradiated flesh sloughed from their bodies, they hemorrhaged internally, and their hair fell out in fistfuls as they stumbled through a cityscape scorched into an alien tableau. Scientist Yoshio Nishina's hands trembled, not from fear, but from revelation, as the Geiger counter in his grasp emitted an increasingly frantic shriek, a sound confirming the unthinkable as he approached ground zero. This was not simply an explosive device. It was a fundamental architecture of the universe unleashed upon a human population. Every prior assumption about the theoretical limits of atomic weaponry had been catastrophically, utterly wrong. As Nishina confronted this new reality, Japan's Supreme War Council convened in Tokyo, about to learn that Hiroshima was merely a prelude. At 11:02 a.m. on August 9th, while the Big Six were finally absorbing the initial reports, an aide burst into the chamber. The message he carried drained the blood from every face. Nagasaki had been struck by a second atomic bomb. The room fell into a profound silence, broken only by the sharp clatter of Admiral Taijiro Toyoda's pen falling to the mahogany table. Another bomb, just 3 days later. In that instant, the entire strategic calculus of the Japanese high command disintegrated. The belief that America possessed only a single experimental weapon was shattered. If they had 2, they could have 10 or 100. The nation's entire defensive doctrine, to inflict such horrific casualties during a ground invasion that America would be forced to negotiate, had been rendered meaningless. Why would the United States sacrifice its men on Japan's beaches when it could now simply erase its cities from existence, one by one, from the stratosphere? Even in the face of this apocalyptic new reality, War Minister Korechika Anami remained unyielding. For him, the concept of a dishonored survival was intolerable. He offered a chillingly poetic vision to the stunned Supreme Council. Would it not be wondrous, he asked, for this whole nation to be destroyed like a beautiful flower? This was the warrior's code taken to its most extreme and devastating conclusion, a philosophical preference for national extinction over the humiliation of surrender. But this ideological stalemate was about to be shattered by an unexpected and deeply flawed piece of intelligence. On August 10th, Japanese forces captured an American fighter pilot, Marcus McDilda, shot down just 2 days after Hiroshima. Under interrogation and torture, McDilda, a conventional pilot with absolutely no clearance or knowledge of the atomic program, fabricated a story to save his own life. Desperate, he told his captors precisely what they feared most, that the Americans possessed an arsenal of over 100 atomic bombs and had the capacity to drop 3 a day. He claimed Tokyo was the next target, to be followed by Kyoto and Osaka, in a relentless campaign to obliterate every major Japanese city. This catastrophic vision, however, was a fabrication. In reality, the American atomic arsenal was empty. The next bomb would not be ready until late August, and the production line moved at a glacial pace. But the desperate, technically laced confession of a captured pilot, Marcus McDilda, proved devastatingly convincing. When this false intelligence reached Japan's Supreme War Council, it carried the force of a final, decisive blow. War Minister Anami, who had once spoken of a beautiful national destruction, now read the report, his voice heavy with the mathematics of annihilation. 1 atomic bomb, it stated, could obliterate 6 square miles, the equivalent of 2,000 B-29s. The Americans, the report claimed, possessed 100 such weapons and could deploy 3 a day. Tokyo itself was a likely target. The ensuing silence was broken only by the labored breathing of Admiral Suzuki. These were commanders who had orchestrated campaigns across the Pacific, men who had never known true defeat. Now, they confronted a power that rendered their entire military doctrine as obsolete as a samurai's sword in an age of machine guns. And yet, astonishingly, they remained deadlocked. 3 votes to surrender, 3 votes to continue to fight, even against atomic annihilation. The stalemate would be broken only by an intervention without precedent in the nation's history. Just before midnight on August 9th, 1945, that moment arrived. In a profound break with 1,000 years of Japanese tradition, the stalemate over surrender was shattered by an unprecedented intervention. Emperor Hirohito, a figure historically regarded as a living god and elevated above earthly politics, entered the Imperial conference room to personally resolve the deadlock. Before the 6 members of the Supreme War Council and Baron Kichiro Haranuma, all kneeling in formal observance, the emperor spoke. Though small in stature, he wielded an absolute divine authority as he uttered the words that would end not only a war, but an entire philosophy of conflict. I have given serious consideration to the situation at home and abroad. We must bear the unbearable and suffer what is insufferable. This command forced an impossible choice between honor and survival. While Prime Minister Suzuki accepted the new reality, others, like General Anami, could not. Hours before the emperor's broadcast on August 15th, Anami performed ritual seppuku, a final adherence to a warrior code that atomic weapons had rendered obsolete. His last poem, written in his own blood, professed loyalty, never acknowledged in the world, had irrevocably changed, a tragic and epitomized by the earlier, fatal miscalculation of Admiral Toyota, who had so confidently declared the Americans could not possess multiple atomic bombs. In the war's aftermath, as the staggering scale of the Manhattan Project was unveiled, it is said that Toyota spent hours in silent contemplation, staring at photographs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He was confronting an industrial achievement that Japanese scientists had considered impossible. The atomic bombings did more than force a surrender. They marked the definitive end of a military philosophy built on honor, sacrifice, and known calculus of conventional warfare. For this reason, modern military planners study this episode not as history, but as a profound warning against the dangers of cognitive blindness in leadership. It is a case study in how expertise can become a prison, how professional knowledge can prevent leaders from recognizing revolutionary change. As we face our own technological upheavals, from artificial intelligence and cyber warfare to space-based weapons, the story of Japan's leadership in August 1945 remains painfully relevant. It demonstrates that the greatest military disasters often stem not from an external enemy, but from an internal inability to adapt to new realities. The Japanese High Command could not believe in the bomb's devastating power because they had convinced themselves it was a fantasy. Ultimately, their scientific knowledge, their professional expertise, and their cultural confidence became weapons used against them, a testament to the fact that the most dangerous enemy is the certainty that you understand the rules, even when someone else has already changed them forever.